There are certain rules you expect to live by. Don't murder people. Pay your taxes, or at least the ones your accountant can't hide. Look both ways before crossing the street. These are the pillars of a functioning society. Then there are the rules that make you question if you've slipped into a parallel dimension where beige is a religion and joy is a finable offense. I found that dimension. Its name was Maple Creek Estates. It all started so beautifully. My wife, Sarah, and I had just closed on our first real house. Not a condo with paper-thin walls where you could hear your neighbor's existential sighs, but a proper two-story colonial with a yard big enough for a dog to achieve a respectable top speed. We'd spent years saving, years dreaming of this slice of suburban paradise. For 3 weeks, we were in a blissful haze of unpacking boxes, arguing over paint swatches, and discovering the unique quirks of our new domain, like the one light switch in the kitchen that, for reasons known only to God and the previous owner, also controlled the garage door opener. Life was good. The American dream, complete with a 30-year mortgage that felt like a ball and chain forged by monopoly money. On a sun-drenched Saturday afternoon, I stood on my freshly swept porch, admiring my handiwork. The grass was mowed, the hedges were trimmed, a brand-new grill, a gleaming silver behemoth I'd named the Broker, stood proudly, ready for its inaugural burger-charring ceremony. "You look like a proud father," Sarah said, sliding the screen door open and handing me an ice-cold beer. "I am," I said, taking a long sip. "I've created this porch, this general vicinity of porchness. It is perfect." "Almost," she said with a sly grin. "You forgot the final touch." She disappeared inside and returned with the housewarming gift from her parents. A simple, sturdy welcome mat made of coir, the bristly stuff that's great for scraping mud off your shoes. In plain black script, it said, "Welcome, y'all." I loved it. It was unpretentious. It was friendly. It was, in the grand scheme of things, an utterly insignificant rectangle of woven coconut fiber. "Hey, y'all," Sarah teased as I placed it perfectly in front of the door. "Leo, we live in Ohio. People here say you guys." "This is cultural appropriation of the highest order." "Nonsense," I declared, stepping back to admire it. "It's not a geographical statement. It's a philosophical one. It's a warm, all-encompassing greeting. It's the opposite of thou shalt not pass." "It's perfect." We stood there for a moment, arms around each other, basking in the glow of new homeownership. The birds were chirping. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the giant oak tree in our front yard. It was idyllic. It was peaceful. It was unfortunately the last moment of pure, unadulterated peace I would experience for the next several months. 3 days later, the first shot was fired. I came home from work to find a crisp, white envelope taped to our front door. It wasn't a friendly note from a neighbor or a flyer for a pizza place. The envelope was thick, expensive-feeling cardstock, and in the top left corner, embossed in a severe font, were the words, "Maple Creek Homeowners Association, Office of Compliance." "Office of Compliance?" I muttered to myself. "Sounds like a place where they send rogue staplers for reprogramming." I opened it. Inside, on letterhead so formal it could have been announcing a royal death, was my first introduction to the iron fist that ruled Maple Creek. Notice of violation. To Resident, 112 Arbor Lane, from the Maple Creek Architectural Review Committee. Date, September 8, 2025. Violation. Section 7. Article 4 of the Maple Creek Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, states, "All exterior doormats must be of a solid, neutral color, black, gray, or beige, and shall not exceed 24 inches by 36 inches. No text, logos, or whimsical imagery is permitted. Your property is in violation due to a non-compliant doormat containing unapproved text. Welcome, y'all. Action required. Please rectify this violation within 48 hours to avoid further action, including the levying of fines as outlined in the association bylaws. I read it twice, then a third time, just to make sure I hadn't suffered a minor stroke. Whimsical imagery. They were classifying the word y'all as whimsy. I walked inside, the letter held between my thumb and forefinger like it was contaminated. "Sarah?" I called out. "You're not going to believe this." She read it, and a little crease of worry formed between her eyebrows. "Oh boy, the welcome wagon here is more of a compliance wagon." "This has to be a joke," I said, laughing. "It's a prank, right? One of the neighbors is having a little fun with the new guy." "I don't know, Leo. It looks pretty official." "Official? It's officially insane. What kind of person spends their day patrolling for cheerful greetings? Is there a beige Stapo I wasn't aware of?" My mind was racing, picturing a shadowy figure in a trench coat, snapping clandestine photos of our porch. And who decides what's whimsical? If I had a mat that said "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," would that be okay? It's not particularly whimsical. "Leo, please," Sarah said, adopting the tone of a gentle hostage negotiator. Let's just get a new mat. It's not worth making a fuss. We just moved in. We have to live here." "Fuss? I'm not making a fuss. I'm just trying to understand the tyrannical regime we've unwittingly joined." But I could see the logic in her words. We didn't want to be those neighbors before we even knew anyone's name. "Fine, I'll make a phone call. I'm sure a reasonable conversation will clear this all up." Oh, the sweet, naive optimism of my former self. The letter listed a phone number for the HOA president, a woman named Brenda Wexler. I pictured a sweet, grandmotherly type, probably just doing her best to keep things tidy. I was wrong. So wrong. The phone rang twice before it was picked up with a clipped, "Wexler." Hi, yes, is this Brenda Wexler?" "It is," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. It was the kind of voice you'd expect from a speaking clock that also judges you for calling. "Great. My name is Leo Maxwell, from 112 Arbor Lane. I'm one of the new residents. I just received a notice about my welcome mat, and I'm pretty sure there's been a misunderstanding." I gave a little chuckle, trying to inject some levity into the conversation. The chuckle died in the dead air on the other end of the line. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Maxwell," Brenda stated flatly. "The bylaws are quite clear. Your mat is non-compliant." "Right, I read that part. It's a welcome mat. It says welcome. It's performing its designated function. With enthusiasm, I might add. The rules, Mr. Maxwell, are not concerned with a mat's function or its perceived enthusiasm," she said. And I could practically hear her capitalizing the R in rules. "They are concerned with uniformity and aesthetic cohesion. That is what maintains our property values." I took a deep breath. "Okay, I get that. I do. But are we really worried that my friendly doormat is going to send the housing market into a tailspin? It's not like I've parked a monster truck on the lawn." A pause. "Are you parking a monster truck on your lawn, Mr. Maxwell?" No, it's a metaphor. We don't permit monster trucks either. That's in Section 12. This was going nowhere. "Look, Brenda, can't we just agree this is a bit silly? I'm new here. You could just give me a warning. I don't know. I'll flip the mat over for now, and we can forget the whole thing." "The notice was your warning," she said, her voice dropping to an icy chill. "You have 48 hours from the time of issuance to rectify the violation. That means you have until tomorrow at 3:15 p.m. After that, a fine of $50 will be levied. Have a pleasant day." And with a decisive click, she was gone. I stood there, phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I felt like I had just been verbally audited. Sarah looked at me, her expression a mixture of pity and "I told you so." "Reasonable conversation?" she asked gently. "I think I'd have more luck reasoning with a garden gnome," I said, slumping onto the couch. "A whimsical one." We didn't rectify the violation, not out of defiance, really, but out of sheer, principle-driven stubbornness. It was the most harmless thing in the world, and I refused to be bullied by the Matt police. 2 days later, a second envelope was taped to our door. Inside was a bill. Invoice. Amount due, $50. Reason. Non-compliance, Section 7, Article 4. Doormat violation. Clipped to the invoice was a photograph. A glossy 4x6 color photo of our front porch. Our welcome mat was circled in a thick, angry red marker, like it was Exhibit A in a felony case. That's when it stopped being a silly disagreement. That's when it became personal. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had stood on the sidewalk, taken a picture of my home to document my crime, printed it out, and delivered it to me with a bill. The war had begun. I just didn't know what my counterattack would be yet. For the next week, the $50 fine was a silent, mocking houseguest. It sat on our kitchen island, a constant reminder of the beige tyranny under which we now lived. Sarah urged me to just pay it. "It's $50, Leo. That's one less fancy pizza. Just pay it and it's over." "No," I said, perhaps a bit too dramatically. "It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about the principle. This is how it starts. First, they come for the welcome mats. Then they come for the decorative wreaths. Before you know it, we'll all be wearing gray jumpsuits and saluting a statue of Brenda every morning." "You've been watching too many dystopian movies," she sighed, but she didn't push it. She knew that look in my eye. It was my principled stand look, which usually preceded a disastrous and expensive DIY project. Against her better judgment and my own, I decided my next move would be a diplomatic one. I would go to the source. I would attend the monthly HOA meeting. I imagined a town hall-style gathering of reasonable adults where I could plead my case, maybe get a few laughs, and have the whole thing dismissed. I would appeal to their common sense. It was a solid plan, based on the deeply flawed assumption that I was dealing with people who possessed any. The meeting was held in the Maple Creek Community Clubhouse, a building with all the charm of a dental office waiting room. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial strength cleaner. I was one of about 10 residents in attendance, most of whom looked to be in their late 70s and seemed more interested in the complimentary shortbread cookies than in community governance. At the front of the room, on a slightly elevated dais, sat the Trinity of Power. In the center was Brenda Wexler, wearing a khaki vest with an alarming number of pockets, like she was about to go on a safari for code violations. To her right sat a man I'd later learn was Gary, a silent, perpetually tired-looking individual who served as the board's treasurer. To her left was a woman who was knitting with a furious intensity, her needles clicking together like tiny, dueling swords. This was Sheila, the board secretary. The meeting droned on for what felt like an eternity. Gary read a treasurer's report so dry it could have been used as a desiccant. Sheila provided minutes from the last meeting, which included a 15-minute debate on whether petunias were an acceptable alternative to marigolds in the community flower beds. They were not. Finally, Brenda announced, "We will now open the floor to public comments. Please keep your statements to 3 minutes." This was my moment. I stood up, clutching my violation notice like a sacred scroll. "Hi, everyone," I began, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. "My name is Leo Maxwell. My wife Sarah and I just moved into 112 Arbor Lane." A few polite nods. So far, so good. First of all, we love it here. It's a beautiful neighborhood, and everyone we've met has been wonderful. A little flattery never hurt. Now, I'm here tonight because of a small issue. I received this notice regarding my welcome mat. I held it up. Apparently, my mat, which says, "Welcome, y'all," is in violation of the rule against text and whimsical imagery. I paused for a chuckle. None came. Sheila's knitting needles picked up speed. "Look," I continued, a little sweat trickling down my back. "I understand rules are important. They stop people from, painting their house neon pink or raising livestock." I glanced at Brenda, hoping for a glimmer of understanding. Her face was a stone mask. "But we're talking about a piece of woven fiber that says hello. Are we really dedicating our collective energy to legislating politeness? Is this really the slippery slope we need to worry about?" I thought it was a pretty good speech, eloquent, reasonable, with a dash of self-deprecating humor. Brenda let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she responded. "Thank you for your comments, Mr. Maxwell." She didn't look at me, but addressed the room as a whole. "As our new resident has so colorfully pointed out, the association does indeed have rules. These rules were provided to him at closing. They were agreed upon when he purchased his home. They are not suggestions. They are covenants." She finally turned her gaze to me, and it felt like being pinned by an entomologist. "If we make an exception for your whimsical mat, what's next? A plastic flamingo? A garden gnome? An unapproved mailbox? It is a slippery slope to chaos. The rule exists to maintain a consistent, dignified aesthetic that protects the property values for everyone in this community." She said everyone, like it was a weapon pointed at me. "The fine stands," she concluded, her voice cold and final. "And please be aware that as per the bylaws, the fine will double for every 7 days you remain in non-compliance. Your $50 fine became $100 yesterday. Next week it will be $200. Are there any other comments?" I stood there, mouth agape. She hadn't just disagreed with me. She'd publicly humiliated me. She'd painted me as a reckless anarchist who, if left unchecked, would single-handedly bring about the flamingo apocalypse and tank the local housing market. I mumbled a "no, that's all," and sank back into my chair, my face burning. I was no longer just a resident. I was the enemy. The drive home was silent. When I walked in the door, Sarah took one look at my face and knew. "That bad, huh?" "Worse," I said, throwing my keys on the counter. "I am now public enemy number 1 in the war against whimsy. The fine is up to $100. I spent the rest of the evening pacing. I was angry, I was embarrassed, and I was trapped. Paying the fine now felt like a surrender. But not paying it meant watching it balloon into a ridiculous sum. I was stewing in my own impotent rage, pacing back and forth in the garage, my sanctuary of solitude and sawdust. And that's when I saw it. Through the open garage door, illuminated by the porch light, was my driveway. It was huge, a vast, empty, perfectly smooth expanse of dark gray concrete, a blank canvas, an idea, a terrible, wonderful, magnificently petty idea began to form in my mind. It started as a spark, then quickly grew into a raging inferno of malicious compliance. The bylaws. They were Brenda's Bible. She lived and died by them. What did they say about driveways? I sprinted inside, grabbing the 3-ring binder of HOA rules, a tome so thick it could stop a small-caliber bullet. Sarah looked up from her book, startled. "What are you doing?" "Research," I exclaimed, frantically flipping through pages. I found the index. Fences, flags, flower beds. Ah, driveways. Section 9. I read it, my heart pounding with a giddy excitement. It was beautiful. It was poetry. It dictated the approved materials, concrete or asphalt only. The required state of repair, no cracks exceeding 1/4 inch in width, and its designated use for the temporary stationing of registered passenger vehicles. And that was it. There was nothing else. Not a single word about color. Not a syllable about surface treatments. And most importantly, not a peep about painting on it. I looked up at Sarah, a wild grin spreading across my face. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling with revelation, "they have rules for the color of your window shutters. They have rules for the height of your grass to the millimeter. They have rules for the approved species of ornamental shrubbery." "And your point is?" she asked, looking wary. "They have no rules, none, about what you can paint on your own driveway." Her eyes widened in dawning horror. "Leo, what are you thinking?" "Oh no, I see that look in your eye. That's the same look you had before you tried to build that brick pizza oven in the backyard and ended up setting the fence on fire. This will be better than the pizza oven," I promised, "and significantly less flammable. She fined me for a welcome mat? Fine, I'll give her a welcome. A welcome so big she can see it from the International Space Station. The next morning I was a man on a mission. I needed a professional. Someone who could execute my vision of grand-scale pettiness. I started calling local contractors, looking underlined striping and asphalt painting. The first call was discouraging. "Bob's Precision Pavement Markings. This is Bob." His voice was all business. "Hi, Bob. My name is Leo. I have a slightly unusual residential project I was hoping to get a quote on." "All right," he said cautiously. "What are we talking about? Ceiling? Crack repair?" "Painting, actually. I want to paint a word on my driveway." "Okay, house numbers? A no parking sign?" "Bigger," I said. "I want to paint the word welcome in, say, 20-foot-tall letters." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. "So, let me get this straight," Bob finally said, his voice laced with confusion. "You want me to paint the word welcome in 20-foot-tall letters on your residential driveway?" "That's the gist of it, Bob. Capital letters. Very friendly font. Nothing too aggressive." "Is this for an HOA-approved event?" "Let's just say the HOA is the inspiration for the event," I said evasively. "Look, sir," Bob said, his tone shifting from confused to wary. "My business is fully licensed and insured. I do parking lots, airports, municipal roads. I don't really do spite projects. I'm gonna have to pass on this one." He hung up before I could argue. The second call went similarly. I was starting to lose hope. Maybe my grand vision was destined to remain just that. Then I made the third call. A gravelly voice answered with a cheerful, "Gus's grime and lines, you got Gus." "Hi, Gus, Leo here. I have a weird job for you, and 2 guys have already hung up on me, so I'll just get right to it." I explained the entire saga. The mat, the violation, the meeting with Brenda, my discovery of the driveway loophole. I laid it all out. When I finished, there was a pause. I braced for the click of the hang-up. Instead, I heard a low chuckle. Then it grew into a deep, rumbling belly laugh. A genuine, joyous laugh that went on for a solid 10 seconds. "So she fined you for the mat," Gus finally gasped, catching his breath. "A welcome mat?" "The fine is now up to $200, I informed him. He howled with laughter again. "Buddy, I have been waiting for a call like this my entire life. My sister lives in one of these places. She's got an HOA president who tried to write her up, 'cause her garden hose wasn't coiled in a clockwise direction. These people are a different breed." I felt a wave of relief. I had found my people. "So you're not going to hang up on me?" "Hang up? I'm going to give you a discount. This ain't just a job. This is community service. So, 20-foot letters, you say? What color we thinking? I've got a very durable, very noticeable traffic-grade white." "Gus," I said, a grin plastered on my face. I think we're going to be great friends. Gus came over that afternoon. He was a big guy in his 50s with a weathered face, a friendly smile, and hands stained with a rainbow of old paint. He looked at my driveway, then back at me, a twinkle in his eye. "Oh yeah," he said, nodding slowly. This'll work just fine." We spent an hour with a tape measure and a piece of chalk, mapping it out. We discussed fonts like we were designing the Declaration of Independence. "We want something classic," I said, "but with a hint of Kiss My Asphalt." "I'm thinking a nice, bold sans serif," Gus mused. "Clear, legible, and utterly unapologetic." We settled on a plan. He and his two-man crew would arrive at 8 a.m. on Saturday. He'd bring the custom stencils, the industrial line painting machine, and several gallons of the brightest white paint known to man. As he was leaving, he clapped me on the shoulder. "You're doing a good thing here, Leo," he said seriously. "Men have fought wars for less." The plan was in motion. Saturday was Judgment Day. The night before the operation, I barely slept. I was vibrating with a mixture of nervous energy and giddy anticipation. It felt like Christmas Eve, if Santa were delivering a giant payload of passive aggression. Sarah, who had slowly transitioned from horrified skeptic to amused co-conspirator, patted my arm. "Try to get some sleep. You have a big day of being a menace to society tomorrow." Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a rebellion. At 7:59 a.m., I was on my porch with a mug of coffee, my heart thumping a steady drumbeat of excitement. At 8 a.m. sharp, a low rumble echoed down the street. Gus's work truck, a glorious beast of rust and utility, turned the corner and pulled up to my curb. It was a beautiful, noisy, diesel-powered declaration that things were about to get interesting. Gus hopped out, beaming. "Morning, Leo. Beautiful day to make a statement, ain't it?" His two-man crew, a lanky young guy named Kevin and a quiet, muscular man named Miguel, got to work immediately. They were a whirlwind of professional efficiency, unloading giant, rolled-up stencils, a machine that looked like a cross between a lawn-mower and a spaceship, and several 5-gallon buckets of paint. The clanging of metal and the cheerful shouts of the crew were a stark contrast to the usual Saturday morning tranquility of Maple Creek, which was typically punctuated only by the gentle whir of electric leaf blowers. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. Curtains twitched. A few dog walkers paused at a safe distance, pretending to check their phones while obviously watching the unfolding drama. Then, a friendly face appeared. It was Dave, my next-door neighbor. He was a retired history teacher in his early 70s, a genuinely nice guy I'd chatted with a few times while wrestling with my lawnmower. He wandered over, coffee mug in hand, a curious glint in his eye. "Morning, Leo," he said, his gaze fixed on the enormous stencils being unrolled on my lawn. "Bit of a project you've got going here." "Just a little redecorating, Dave," I said with a grin. Dave squinted at the giant, floppy letter Miguel was wrestling with. Is that a W?" "The biggest, friendliest W in the state of Ohio," I confirmed. Dave was quiet for a moment. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Is this about the welcome mat? Brenda was bragging at the potluck about nipping a compliance issue in the bud." "This," I said, gesturing to the scene of impending chaos, "is the welcome mat's final form." Dave let out a short, sharp laugh. "Son, I've lived here 20 years. I've seen that woman try to fine a family because their son's treehouse was visible from the street. You're my new hero. Can I get you guys some donuts?" Before I could answer, a new player entered the game. The front door of the beige house directly across the street opened. It was Brenda's house. She emerged, clad in a shockingly bright pink tracksuit. In her hand, she held a clipboard. It was her Excalibur. The final boss had entered the arena. She didn't storm over. She stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, a statue of pure, unadulterated disapproval. She was watching, waiting. Gus saw her and gave me a subtle nod. "Showtime," he muttered under his breath. The crew finished laying out the stencils. Spelled out across the entire length of my two-car driveway was the framework for my masterpiece. WELCOME. Each letter was nearly as tall as I was. That's when Brenda made her move. She marched across the street with the determined stride of a general inspecting his troops. Her face was set in a grim, tight-lipped expression. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She wasn't shouting, but her tone carried an authority she clearly felt was absolute. "What are you doing?" I took a deep, calming breath and put on my most pleasant smile. "Good morning, Brenda. Lovely day, isn't it? We're just doing a little home improvement. You know, boosting that aesthetic cohesion you were talking about." "You cannot do this!" she snapped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is a clear violation." This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I had rehearsed in my head a dozen times. "Is it?" I asked, my voice calm and genuinely curious. "Because I read the bylaws cover to cover, twice. Section 9, subsection B, driveways. A very interesting read, by the way. It says nothing about painted greetings. If you can show me the rule I'm breaking, Brenda, I promise I'll stop immediately." Her face, already pinched with anger, seemed to tighten even further. She was sputtering. For the first time, I had seen the unflappable queen of compliance completely flustered. She was actually holding her own copy of the bylaws, a binder identical to mine, and she started flipping through it with frantic, trembling fingers. This is an unapproved modification. It's an eyesore," she finally managed, having failed to find the non-existent rule. Gus, who had been quietly enjoying the show, decided to chime in. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward, his expression one of polite professionalism. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he began, his voice calm and steady. "My lines are clean, the paint is professional traffic grade, and this W is perfectly symmetrical. This is art. It's not an eyesore, it's a feature, a custom installation." That was it. That was the last straw for Brenda. Her composure shattered. "I'm calling the police!" she shrieked, finally losing the battle for volume control. "This is vandalism." "How can I vandalize my own property, Brenda?" I called after her as she stormed back towards her house, phone already pressed to her ear. "That's not how that word works." I turned to Gus and gave him the nod. He grinned, put on a pair of safety glasses, and fired up the line painting machine. The roar of its small engine was deafeningly beautiful. It drowned out everything: the chirping birds, the distant traffic, and any remaining shreds of Brenda's authority. He started on the W. The machine sprayed a thick, perfect line of brilliant white paint. Against the dark gray concrete, it was shockingly, gloriously vivid. A small crowd of neighbors had started to gather on the sidewalk now. They were murmuring. Some were filming on their phones. Dave had returned with a box of donuts and was giving a play-by-play commentary to an elderly woman next to him, as if it were the final round of the Masters. We watched, mesmerized, as the letters took shape. W. E. L. C-O-M-E. It was even more magnificent than I had imagined. It was a monument to pettiness, a Sistine Chapel of spite, just as Miguel was putting the finishing touches on the final I. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb. It didn't use its siren, but its presence sent a ripple through the crowd of onlookers. 2 officers got out. One was older, with silver hair, and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen it all. The other was much younger, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he fought to suppress a smile. Brenda, who had been waiting on her porch like a vulture, practically flew across the lawn to meet them. She launched into a frantic, high-pitched tirade before they'd even had a chance to close their car doors. And he's defacing the neighborhood. It's obscene! I demand you arrest him. This is a complete breakdown of order." She gestured wildly at my beautiful driveway. The older officer, whose name tag read Miller, held up a hand to pause her stream of words. He had the calm, steady aura of a man who had diffused 1,000 domestic disputes over thermostat settings. He walked toward me. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on here?" he asked, his voice even and professional. "Morning, officers," I said, trying to look as innocent as a man with a 20-foot welcome on his driveway possibly could. "Just welcoming people to my home. Very enthusiastically, as you can see. The lady across the street seems to have misplaced her sense of humor." Officer Miller's eyes scanned the driveway, then my face, then the crowd. He seemed to assess the entire situation in a matter of seconds. The younger officer, Davis, was now staring at my driveway with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. Miller turned back to Brenda, who was vibrating with indignation. "Ma'am, is this his private property?" "Yes, but it's an HOA-controlled—" He cut her off gently. "Ma'am, with all due respect, an HOA bylaw is a civil matter. It's not a criminal one. He's not breaking any laws. There's no vandalism here, since it's his own property. There's no public nuisance, and he's not obstructing traffic. Our hands are tied." I heard Officer Davis mutter to Miller, just loud enough for me to catch it. "Technically, it's more of a public welcomance." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Brenda was aghast. "So you're not going to do anything?" "There's nothing for us to do," Officer Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Please do not use the 911 emergency line for homeowner association disputes in the future." With a final nod to me, the two officers got back in their cruiser and drove away. The silence that followed was profound. The crowd of neighbors started to clap. A few of them cheered. Gus and his crew were giving each other high fives. Dave gave me a thumbs up from across the lawn. Brenda was left standing on the curb, utterly and completely defeated. She looked at me, at my driveway, and at the smiling faces of her supposed subjects. Her face was a thundercloud of rage. Without another word, she turned on her heel, marched back into her beige house, and slammed the door. I stood there, in front of my masterpiece, the smell of fresh paint in the air. The war wasn't over, but I had just won the Battle of Arbor Lane. The immediate aftermath of the police leaving was surreal. It felt like the end of a movie. My neighbors, who had previously been polite but distant strangers, were now coming over to shake my hand and slap me on the back. Dave declared that the donuts were victory donuts, and insisted I take the rest of the box. An older woman told me she hadn't been this entertained since her grandson's disastrous wedding. It turned out that Brenda's reign of terror had been a quiet but deeply felt burden on the community, and my absurdly large act of defiance had lanced a boil. The fame, however, came faster than I could have ever imagined. It started with Dave's grandson, a tech-savvy teenager who had filmed the entire confrontation with Brenda and the police. He posted the video, along with a high-angle photo of the completed driveway taken from his bedroom window, on a local community Facebook page. The caption was simple. "My neighbor is a legend. His HOA fined him for his welcome mat, so he did this." The post exploded. By lunchtime, it had hundreds of shares. By dinner time, it was in the thousands. My phone, which usually only buzzed for work emails and texts from Sarah asking if I'd remembered to take out the recycling, began to vibrate non-stop. Friends from college I hadn't spoken to in a decade were sending me laughing emojis. My own mother called. "Leonard Maxwell," she said, using my full name, which was never a good sign. "Your cousin sent me a picture of your driveway. Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, Mom," I sighed. "I'm in a disagreement about exterior decorating." By evening, the local news affiliate had picked up the story from their social media desk. A picture of my driveway was on their website's homepage. The headline read, "Suburban Showdown. Man protests HOA fine with house-sized welcome." The next morning, as I was blearily making coffee, I saw it. A news van was parked across the street. A young, impossibly energetic reporter was standing on the sidewalk, microphone in hand, gesturing towards my house. Sarah peeked out the window. "Oh my God, Leo, they're here! Don't you dare go out there!" "I have to," I said, straightening my shirt. "I have to speak my truth." "Your truth is that you're a professional smart aleck who painted his driveway to annoy a woman named Brenda. Maybe keep that part to yourself." I went out. The reporter, whose name was Tiffany, practically skipped over to me. Her smile was blinding. "Mr. Maxwell, Tiffany Chang, Channel 8 News. Your story has really captured the city's attention. Can you tell us what message you were trying to send with this grand gesture?" She gestured dramatically to the driveway. I cleared my throat, ready for my close-up. I decided to lean into it. "Well, Tiffany," I began, trying to sound thoughtful and profound. "The message is clear. Welcome. We're a friendly community here at Maple Creek. So friendly, in fact, that our homeowners association is deeply, deeply passionate about our doormats. They believe that a mat should be seen and not heard, so to speak. I just wanted to share that welcoming spirit with the world, on a slightly larger scale that complied with all documented bylaws." Tiffany ate it up. "So this was a direct response to the HOA?" "Let's call it an artistic interpretation of the community guidelines," I said with a straight face. "They have very specific rules, and I'm a rule follower. I found a way to express my welcoming nature that was, to the letter, 100% compliant. It's a celebration of bureaucratic loopholes." The story aired on the 5 o'clock news. They used the clip of my interview, footage of the driveway, and even a snippet of the video Dave's grandson had taken of Brenda shrieking at Gus. They tried to get a comment from Brenda, but the segment cut to a shot of her front door, with the reporter saying, "The HOA president declined to comment." I have never felt a victory so sweet. For a few days, I was a local hero. People would drive down our street slowly, taking pictures. Someone left a six-pack of craft beer on my non-compliant welcome mat with a note that said, "From a fellow soldier in the HOA wars, Godspeed." I was a symbol of the common man fighting back against petty tyranny. But I had forgotten the cardinal rule of war. Never underestimate a wounded and humiliated dictator. Brenda had lost the battle of public opinion, but she had retreated to her bunker to plan a new, more devastating attack. It arrived a week later. Not in a plain envelope taped to the door, but via certified mail, requiring my signature. The envelope was from a prestigious-looking law firm downtown. My stomach sank as I signed for it. This felt different. This felt serious. I opened it in the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly. Sarah watched me, her face pale. The letter was 5 pages long, filled with dense, impenetrable legalese that made the original HOA bylaws look like a children's picture book. But I didn't need to be a lawyer to understand the gist of it. It was a formal cease and desist and a notice of fines. They were fining me $5,000. The charge was for making an unapproved architectural and landscaping modification. They were citing a vague catch-all clause in the bylaws about maintaining the aesthetic character and harmony of the community. Apparently, my driveway had shattered the harmony. The letter went on to state that if the driveway was not professionally restored to its original unadorned state within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my house. A lien. A legal claim against my property for an unpaid debt. The humor of the situation evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, metallic taste of fear. The $50 fine had been a joke. The $100 fine had been an insult. This was a nuclear bomb. "Leo, this isn't funny anymore," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper as she read the letter over my shoulder. "A lien! They can force us to sell our house to pay the fine!" "They can't," I insisted, though a knot of dread was tightening in my gut. "It's a scare tactic. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. There's no specific rule against it." "Do we have the money to prove that in court?" she shot back, her fear turning to anger. "Because they do. They have all of our HOA dues to pay for their fancy lawyers to crush us." She was right. I had been so caught up in the cleverness of my rebellion that I hadn't considered the consequences of a truly scorched earth response. I had poked the bear, and now the bear had come back with a legal team and a threat against the biggest investment of our lives. For the first time, I felt a genuine pang of doubt. Had I gone too far? I had won the hearts and minds of the internet and my neighbors, but in the process, I might have just gambled away my home. The giant, cheerful welcome on my driveway suddenly looked less like a symbol of victory and more like the most expensive mistake I had ever made. The lawyer's letter hung over our house like a storm cloud for the next few days. The mood was tense. The thrill of victory had been replaced by the very real anxiety of a potential legal battle. We looked into hiring a lawyer, and the consultation fees alone were enough to make my eyes water. It seemed Brenda was going to win after all, not by being right, but by being able to afford being wrong longer than we could. I was defeated. I was even starting to get quotes for sandblasting my beautiful, spiteful masterpiece into oblivion. Then, on a Tuesday evening, the doorbell rang. It was Dave from next door. He was holding a clipboard and wearing a surprisingly determined expression. "Evening, Leo," he said. "Got a minute? We need to talk strategy." I invited him in. He'd heard about the letter through the neighborhood grapevine, which apparently operated with the speed and efficiency of a Cold War spy network. "Don't you dare touch that driveway," he said before I could even offer him a drink. "You've started something here, son. You've woken the sleeping giant." "Dave, the giant is about to get a lien put on his house," I said glumly. "Nonsense," he scoffed. "You know that clause she's using? The one about maintaining the character of the community? She used that last year to try and force the Hendersons to remove the basketball hoop from their driveway. Said the sound of kids playing was disharmonious. She used it to deny the Patel's request to plant a vegetable garden because tomatoes are not an approved ornamental plant. As it turned out, my story had been the catalyst. My very public fight had emboldened other residents to share their own stories of Brenda's petty tyranny. The neighborhood was buzzing. "You're not alone in this, Leo," Dave continued, his eyes gleaming. "You've got an army. You just don't know it yet." And he was right. Over the next week, a quiet, hilarious rebellion began to bubble up throughout Maple Creek. It was a masterclass in malicious compliance. The Hendersons, who had been forced to remove their basketball hoop, installed a professional-grade 6-foot-tall soccer goal in their front yard. There was no rule against soccer goals. The Patels planted their entire front garden with kale. It was technically an ornamental plant, but it looked ridiculous. A guy down the street who had been fined for his trash cans being visible from the road built an incredibly elaborate, cathedral-like wooden enclosure for them, complete with gargoyles he'd bought on the internet. It was technically compliant, but it was 1,000 times more noticeable than the trash cans had ever been. My driveway had started a movement. Dave's clipboard wasn't just for show. He had been going door to door. "According to the bylaws," he said, tapping the paper, "a special meeting to recall the board can be called if we get signatures from 25% of the homeowners. As of an hour ago, Leo, we're at 40%. A special meeting was called for the following week. The notice was sent out, and the agenda was simple: a vote of no confidence and motion to remove the current HOA board. The night of the meeting, The community clubhouse wasn't empty and sad. It was packed. People were standing along the walls. I saw the Hendersons, the Patels, the guy with the gargoyle trash can shrine. Everyone was there. The atmosphere was electric. Brenda, Gary, and Sheila sat at the front table, looking pale and shaken. For the first time, they were outnumbered. Brenda tried to control the proceedings, banging her gavel for order, but she had lost the room. Dave, as the organizer of the petition, was the first to speak in. He didn't yell or accuse. He simply laid out the facts, listing a dozen instances of the board overstepping its authority and using vague rules to harass residents. Then he opened the floor. One by one, people stood up. It wasn't a torrent of anger, but a calm, steady stream of grievances. A woman spoke about being fined because her holiday lights were still up on January 2nd. A young father talked about receiving a violation because his children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk were considered graffiti. The stories were all different, but the theme was the same. A board that had stopped serving the community and had started ruling it. I didn't even have to say anything. My driveway was the unspoken centerpiece of the entire prosecution. It was the final, absurd straw. Finally, the vote was called. It wasn't even close. It was a near-unanimous landslide. Motion to remove Brenda Wexler as president, passed. Motion to remove Gary and Sheila as board members, passed. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of applause. Brenda just sat there, her face a blank mask of shock. Her reign was over. She quietly gathered her binder, her scepter of power now useless, and walked out the back door of the clubhouse without a word. A new interim board was elected on the spot. The first person nominated? Dave. He accepted. To a standing ovation. Their first motion, proposed by Dave himself, was to retroactively approve my driveway as a permanent community art installation and symbol of neighborhood unity. It passed unanimously. Their second motion was to formally abolish the bylaw regarding doormats. The war was over. The story ends a few weeks later, on a perfect autumn afternoon. Sarah and I are hosting a barbecue in our backyard. Our lawn is filled with our neighbors, the same people who were strangers to us just a couple of months ago. Dave is at the grill with me, giving me pointers on getting the perfect sear. The sound of kids laughing and adults talking fills the air. At one point, I look out past the fence, towards the front of my house. I can see the edge of the driveway, the top of the giant white W gleaming in the sun. It's no longer a symbol of spite. It's a landmark, a conversation starter, a ridiculous, wonderful reminder of how we all came together. You know, Dave says, flipping a burger, Brenda put her house on the market last week. Really? I say, a little surprised. I guess she couldn't stand living in a place with so much whimsy. He laughs. They say good fences make good neighbors. Turns out sometimes a giant, painted act of defiance on your driveway does the trick even better. I look at Sarah, who is chatting happily with the kale lady and the gargoyle guy. She catches my eye and smiles. A genuine, relaxed smile that I realize I haven't seen in weeks. We had our house. We had our friends. We had our community. And right there, on the front porch, sitting proudly in its designated spot, was my welcome mat. Bristly, brown, and utterly non-compliant, it said it all. Welcome, y'all. Some things are just worth fighting for.